today's presentation into two different parts, having spoken to FLS. So rather than focusing entirely on the PCS tender system, we're going to start with a bit of a review on the actual bid submission itself. I'm conscious for, I think most people involved, you're quite familiar with the systems perhaps, but this is the kind of exercise that you might be going through just maybe every so often. It's quite a demanding form to fill in, so we're going to do some general tips and then highlight some of the areas that are not necessarily the core technical aspects of how you're going to do the job, but they are important because they're also scored. So things like environmental approach, community benefits, maybe say a little bit more about fair working practice, and also things like quality management. And I've got some useful links. So once we've gone through those slides, we'll move on to PCS tender, but just to let you know, there is a full pack of slides available that are uploaded. I think once you finish the survey after the training, you can then link through. And so if there is anyone there who's concerned, they'd like to kind of start from basics about registering with the system and so on, and the other PCS system to find the notice, all of that's covered in more detail in the slides itself. Okay, so I'm going to start off just with a few suggestions really based on the types of feedback that we've seen from reviewing tenders, but also speaking to FLS in terms of the things that they're hoping that bidders can pay account to in terms of their actual bids. So most important, and it sounds very obvious, but there is a section, and you'll see this when we do the live demo on PCS tender, that has all the buyer attachment documents. It's very tempting when you first go into PCST to start filling in your name, address, all the different details. However, I would advise you really, before you do that, please go to the attachments area, download all the documents and read them in full, because there will be a lot of advice there. I think Lauren's already referred to documents like specifications. There's an evaluation document which talks about the scoring, but also gives very detailed descriptions of what FLS is looking for in the response for each question. So it can be a bit time consuming, but it definitely pays dividends later on once you come to writing up your answers. You can download a copy of the questionnaire. I know sometimes it's quite hard to go through and screen, so I'll show you that during the demo. And this one I think is possibly the most important if you're looking at how to maximise your score. Looking through the technical questions that you're being asked, now these are the ones where it's all about how will you perform the contract, so kind of looking forwards. All of these are scored, and these are the areas where normally it'll come sort of like, you know, a mark out of 0 out of 5 or whatever. And not just this tender, but many others, it's very easy probably to get an OK mark, but you need to really be looking at how to maximise your score on every single question, even the ones that don't have a big percentage against them. So I would advise you to plan your response, having read all the documents. I do that, to be honest, very low tech. I just handwrite it. I make some notes. I write down some bullet points. I'll make a note of, you know, things, guidance maybe that I've found in some of the documents. But I also look at the question, and I think when we go on to the online demo, you'll see quite a few of the questions have multiple elements to them. Certainly the guidance does as well. So you absolutely need, just, I'm afraid, like a school exam, you need to write down all the points that the buyer wants you to cover, and you answer in exactly that same format. For almost all the questions that I can see here on the technical side, there's some form of either word or page limit. So again, please keep to that. Make sure you've counted certainly the words if that applies. And often there's a minimum or a recommended font size as well. So again, if you go over the words, literally the evaluators will draw a red line and there'll be nothing after that line taken into account for your score. I've heard certainly from buyers a few stories of people putting in very long answers and they've kept all the good stuff to the end and they've basically lost a huge number of marks because of that. Going back to your answers, and again, these are all, most of them are an attached file, so you can use like a Word document. So use some subheadings, don't just put one big long answer, break it up. We use tables quite often if that works out, certainly bullet points, as long as they're not too general, but it certainly makes it a lot easier for the buyers to read and then to score. Don't be too daunted by the details. I think certainly when you go into some of these questionnaires, and particularly the format on PCS Tender, it can look like an awful lot of text and instructions and whatever. But when it comes to answering the technical questions that are there that you're getting scored on, I would just say kind of take a step back and just kind of think what you do in practice on a day-to-day basis. Some people try to over-analyse the question. For sure, if you're not sure what the question means, put something in, a query in through the system. But quite often, things like your words like methodology and your approach, it really is, you know, a day-to-day basis. You start the job. What is it step by step that you're going to do? We'll talk shortly about some of the quality things, how are you going to check the quality and so on. So to some extent, tell the story a little bit. Also, sometimes people quite undersell themselves in these types of answers. So they may be too concise. So again, you can lose lots of marks for that. It could be quite good, I think, you know, if you're sort of maybe things that you think is quite kind of day-to-day and basic, but it turns out that's maybe quite important to showing that you know how to do the job properly. So don't be too concise, but on the other hand, don't include what I would call the waffly, I think the term is blah, 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 that's being used a lot in different contexts here. Try to have what I would call evidence. So if you write something on a tender saying, you know, we're an excellent company, we go the extra mile, we always exceed your every expectation, that kind of statement, okay, is fine, but you absolutely have to back it up with evidence. So the number of jobs you've completed without complaint, whether you've worked on time and to budget. So it comes back to some of these KPIs, but don't just say, you know, we're high value, we're fantastic. You have to give more than that for the buyers to give you a score. If you're answering one question, please don't cross-reference to another response. So I don't know, something about environment, just leave it blank and say see question 5 instead, because you will score 0 for that. Occasionally that might mean repeating some content, and that's normally absolutely okay. If you're worried about that, again, put the question in. And also please be careful about the question deadline. We'll see it when we go online, but I think it's normally a week before the deadline itself. Don't include web links. They won't be followed up in a tender situation for the evaluation. I think always there's usually an instruction as well about, you know, no marketing material, or I think in your context it would be maybe like a company profile or general information as well. Okay, so that's just a very quick kind of whiz through elements that you need to keep in mind when you're actually putting your response together. I'm going to cover now just some of these, not really ancillary, they used to be subjects that were a little bit add-on to tenders. However, now in the current environment, literally, but particularly for public procurement, there's a duty to consider what we call sustainability. So that covers environment, but it also covers the community benefits type side, things like living wage and fair work. And more that will be quite a key part of your scoring. I was just actually having a quick look at some of these, and I can see already it looks like there's about 13%, if not more, of the score comes under some of these sustainability themes. So in recognition that some of these might be areas that you're less familiar with compared to the technical, you know, your team, the equipment, planning and all that type of thing, just going to go through some of the wider issues that are important to think about. So environmental, net zero, I think we're all becoming very familiar with, and this is not just a Scottish ambition, but clearly in Scotland and for public buyers like FLS, this is very much embedded, so that every contract that's let, they will expect us as contractors to be collaborating with the buyer organisation to achieving net zero. So it becomes very much a joint effort. Net zero obviously means that you may still generate carbon emissions, but they'll be offset somehow in your business activities by, and we'll go and have a look at some of the things that you could be thinking about here. For most tenders now, it's not enough just to have an environmental policy that used to just tick the box. You've got to really show that as a business, as an organisation, you've actually got a plan for environmental actions and some of the wider sustainability. Again, for a very small business, for a one-person band, that's quite difficult. I know we're a very small business, but we do still have commitments and actions and a plan that myself as director reviews every year. So some of the carbon emissions type focused elements here are things like on-site power generation to look at. You know, to what extent can you reduce emissions from those sort of generators or just different ways of power supply. Switch to electric, very topical. Obviously in some sectors, if you're delivering in your vans, we've got lots of clients like couriers and people supplying goods, construction materials, for example, they're very focused now on a move to electric. It's not something they can do overnight, but they do, as businesses, they do have a strategy and they're looking at the options, the ranges and so on. So FLS will be expecting their contractors on this and other contracts to already be looking at that for the appropriate vehicles in use on the contract. For buildings, there's an emphasis on energy performance and getting sort of better lighting, for example, heating and so on. Encouraging greener ways of working. So we'll have a wee look in the next slide on some of that. Carbon capture and storage, again, quite a new development, particularly in sort of maybe domestic arrangements, but to what extent that could be done back in your business space as well. So for some people, you may already be starting that, which is fantastic. But for many of us, these are all quite new areas, involve investment, so it's not going to be happening necessarily overnight, but it needs to be in our thinking. So here's some of the maybe more tactical measures that we can be thinking about for reducing impact. Waste and recycling is hugely important, and I think that particularly for some emissions areas, that is very much a very strong theme, and it's something that all businesses can look at. I think further down I've put site waste management plans, and I think that's probably already expected in terms of what happens on the sites that you work in. Reducing emissions from energy use, we've talked a little bit about that. Travelling can be important. Again, for any of us in our organisations, things like driving in a fuel efficient manner, monitoring our fuel use, planning our travel in a certain way. And I think FLS were talking the other day to make sure that jobs are allocated in a way that doesn't involve unnecessary mileage as well. Pollution, so again, that's very much environmental, so things like oil and other fluids out in nature, that there must be strategies not to be causing any pollution there. Training for staff, so again, it's important. There's no point in really having a policy and some actions, but your team needs to be on board really to know what's important and how they need to be reflecting that in their day-to-day work. Sustainable procurement policy applies, I think, probably to everyone. And really all it means is in your supply chain, when you're buying in materials, there's obviously an increasing emphasis, and I think in your own sector now, and particularly construction, the timber, sustainable timber type recommendations, if there was things like fencing involved or whatever, these are now becoming mandatory in most tenders, but also that idea of having some sort of overview into your supply chain to make sure that they, as well as you, are thinking about sustainability. Included in that can even go as far as things like workwear. So depending on who you buy workwear from, do you know that they're not having jackets or sweatshirts made in literally sweatshops or places overseas where the employment conditions are very bad? So that's a case of checking your suppliers' accreditations as well and asking them to verify or getting that from their website. So difficult if you're a very small company, you won't be doing this as a rule. The large companies have whole teams probably who monitor sustainable procurement. But it's something that we can at least start to make inroads into with some of our main suppliers. Importantly, you can expect, and I haven't seen the KPIs for this contract, but I imagine there will be environmental ones. So monitoring and recording activities, monitoring improvements. So it means you kind of need to know, like, what was your fuel usage when you started, sort of thing, and how can you show that you've been able to improve that. So there's quite a lot of administration that might come into the environmental side to be able to do that properly as well. And finally, obviously, your legal compliance. So SEPA, Scottish Government, Zero Waste Scotland, FLS itself, I suspect, have some resources that you can call on there, and trade bodies. I've got some links that we've added in the slides just a little bit further along. So quite a lot there on environmental to be thinking of to make sure that your answers are fully inclusive of all these sort of aspects. Community benefits will apply and they're mandatory for this particular contract for FLS. The scoring is worth 4%. And again, please read the tender guidance in full, because there are documents in the pack which give very clear guidelines on what FLS are looking for. And in particular, you need to focus on what you can offer for this contract. It's okay to give an account of what you've done in the past, but it can only really be used to illustrate maybe that you've, you know, how you've built up contacts, that you know the right people to speak to because you've done it before, that you know particular groups perhaps, and maybe some of the success factors. Maybe, for example, if you've taken on a trainee, you can say, well, you know, we've done this before and we've already got a programme, we've got a way of interviewing, we've got this all already in place. So, but previous, you know, we already sponsor the local football team, or we give to charity and we've given X in the last 5 years, that won't gain any points in this particular question. The focus for community benefits, as Lauren pointed out, is very much on the kind of employability side, I would say, employment, training, and then looking at involving more small businesses and maybe supported businesses in your supply chain. So obviously you'll need to be aware of that when you're writing your answer, to say, you know, what's your approach going to be over the number of years of the contract. But it's got to include an awareness of who you need to collaborate with to make these things happen. So FLS themselves will have people who can assist with community benefits, but because it's very much focused on local delivery, there will be partners, including what I call employability services. So there's quite often I think in like South Lanarkshire, for example, is Routes to Work. So they're kind of set up as partnerships with lots of different bodies, and it's all about getting people into work. So you might need a bit of research depending on the region that you're bidding into to see who the local employability service is. Job Centre Plus are there obviously as well to source candidates. CITB, which is the Construction Industry and Training Board, can help. Skills Development Scotland, they have very good links. So if it's a case of liaising with schools or colleges to maybe source people for work placements, things like that, Skills Development Scotland are a very good kind of first door to start with. You need to think about your plan to deliver across the term of the contract. There's no minimum threshold here for where the community benefits kick in terms of the value of the work that you've got, but you should have a sort of overall plan as to what you might be able to do. I'm just thinking work placements is a good example. You could say, well, in each year of the contract, assuming obviously you get work through the framework, we will take on perhaps 2 work placements a year for X number of weeks. So you can sort of plan things a little bit time-wise that way. And again, like environment, anything that you're doing in community benefits throughout the contract, as well as having your plan in place, you need to record actions and report back regularly to FLS. Here's some examples from the STP training. Just while I'm mentioning that, by the way, Supplier Development Programme offer free training in a whole load of themes. There may be some of these coming up before the deadline for this tender. If you wanted, because you're already registered, you can check the calendar and log in for some of these. So community benefits is one of the courses offered in particular. But here's just a summary again, really, of the type of particularly employment, perhaps focused things that you could be doing under community benefits. Supported employment is for people with disabilities or other disadvantaged groups. Those might not be visible sort of physical disabilities in certain sectors. Obviously, there's constraints in that area. But there are opportunities maybe for people with some form of disability that's perhaps more on the sort of autism spectrum. So they're perfectly capable to take on the work, but just need the work adapted a little bit, perhaps if it's office-based or whatever, to suit their particular additional needs. Advertising job opportunities is something you need to commit to as well as soon as they come up. Training for your existing workforce is one I think that Lauren mentioned as well. And that to some extent is one of the easier ones for community benefits, so that you can show over the coming years of the contract what you're committing to for your existing team. And then mentoring. So again, many companies amongst you will have quite well-established skills. And it could be that some of that is information that's very useful for local businesses. It doesn't need to be in ground preparation or forestry works. It might be in finance. For some companies, I don't know, could be marketing. I've seen some people offer help to SMEs based on their own social media type capability as well. Fair Work First, I think Lauren's really largely covered this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. But again, please read the guidelines in the tender documentation. The document I'm looking at here is the Valuation and Award Criteria document. And there's a very detailed description and a number of bullet points of all the different areas that come under this heading, Fair Work First. We have a client who lost quite an important number of, not a large number of points, but they were very important in the final score when they were answering the Fair Work question, and they forgot to mention no 0 hours contracts. So it's, you know, make sure that you follow the list and the guidance that's given by FLS for these. Again, you know, you might be a small organisation, so some of these you might think, oh, well, trade unions, consultation. It's not necessarily that you're going to be organising great big meetings for that, but it could be that it's your Monday morning meeting that you use. It could be that you've got an open door policy, for example, for the few staff that you do have, that everyone feels comfortable. And there are issues, I think, as well about HR policies, for example, that I've mentioned further down. There are basic policies which all organisations really need to have as soon as you're employing personnel. So a grievance policy, proper contracts of employment, all these type of things. If you've been asked to monitor and report on this area, that can be a little bit challenging sometimes. If it's living wage, you may want to offer what I would call open accounting. So you, without disclosing personal information, you can demonstrate through payroll what the hourly rates are that are being applied. So somebody could audit that that's above the current rate. You can maybe do staff surveys if you're a slightly bigger organisation in terms of well-being. And I think I've seen, I'll show you through the links. I think one of the Healthy Working Lives have a template for that if people are interested. Okay, staff retention figures can be quite good to sort of demonstrate evidence that your working conditions are quite good. And obviously training records and so on. Okay, and then quality. So quality management, and this can be a bit challenging sometimes. It comes up in the qualification section in the SPD, where you can be asked for, do you have an externally audited quality management system? If no, what do you have? So you won't fail if you don't have ISO 9001, but you do have to have a good account of the quality measures and instruments that you've got in place. Again, even as a very small company, this still applies. So some of the things here that I'd be looking to put down, you may want to have an overall quality policy. It's kind of a little bit more high level commitment and what are the quality issues for your business. More important, I think, is this third bullet point, which is the quality controls. And in particular, if there's a quality question, which I think there is in the technical section, it's all about how do you know, or how do you assure that everything's done properly, and then what do you do if it's not, and who's responsible. So quite often we'll put together a table of the different processes in a contract, and beside them identify for each business what is it that they do. So at the order comes in, how quickly do you respond as a quality measure? If you're ordering materials, have you an approved list of providers, for example? And then down to the workmanship on site. Do you do inspections, audits? How do you train your people on site to make sure the job's done right first time? Tools and equipment, are these checked? Do you buy good quality to make sure they don't break down, which I think in this contract is obviously quite critical? And maybe broader things like customer service. Do you invoice on time? Is it accurate? And all of those quality controls need to cover any subcontractors that you're responsible for as well. I note you've got some key performance indicators, so that will feed very much into that quality control section that you have as well, but you'll have to say then not just, yes, here are the KPIs, but what are we doing to make sure that we're meeting them? So again, that's back to the controls, checks, trained people, senior staff coming in possibly. A complaints procedure is a standard part of quality management, quality control, and that's to show FLS that if something goes wrong, there's a very fast way to get that escalated and sorted out, and that has to be written down. It can be half a page, doesn't need to be a very complicated document, but when the complaint comes in, what happens next? How quickly is it dealt with? So within so many hours or days, and who's responsible? And what they call an escalation. So if the first person can't solve it, who looks at it next till you get up to kind of managing director level. If you're a small business, I guess everything goes straight through to the top, but again, you need to say how quickly you'll deal with things. Supplier approval we've covered. Staff briefings, I think, is good. So it's not just training, but maybe that Monday morning meeting scenario. So I'm probably quite convinced that as you're having your sort of what's coming up this week, you're also having a discussion on how did we do last week, what's going well, what's not. And that is quality management. That's part of the overall process. You might have more formal audits, and you might possibly also have staff training, possibly on site as a toolbox talk on particular aspects of a job. I've seen that, for example, if there's a particularly challenging, technically challenging piece of work to do, then a good company will come in and do training. So it's not just health and safety training, but technical training to make sure that all the staff understand how to do that properly. And then your regular meetings with the clients, obviously, to discuss performance. Okay, so already just in a few themes there, there's actually quite a lot potentially to cover and to be thinking about in these sections on some of these additional areas. I've added some links there, so when you get the slides through, those links will be live. And SDP, in fact, have another layer of links as well that you can see down at the bottom here. The supplier journey is a very good general source. It's produced by the Scottish Government, and it is literally a step-by-step guide to all aspects of tendering. So it might be worth dipping into if you're relatively new to the process as well. The PCS tender has a help desk, but they won't help you with the content of your tender, but they will help you if you've got any problems actually using the system itself. Okay, so as I say, there's a few slides on beyond here, but I'm going to switch out now. I'm going to stop sharing, Elizabeth, and just move on to the online demo. If that's okay.
That's great, thank you, Jill.
Stop sharing. Okay, so we're going to just have a quick run through then of the PCS tender system and maybe try and highlight some of the things that we've looked at before. I think most of you are now already registered and have been using this for quite some years, as I understand. For anyone that's not, there's an introductory registration and the slides will give you details of how to do that. So basically, once you come in to PCS tender, everything from FLS, we need to go through this ITTs route. Oh, it's going to ask me to log in again. Yeah, so sorry, here's the registration down here just when you come in. PCS tender, that's just reminding me, PCS tender will drop off, I think it's after about 20 minutes of inaction. So please be careful when you're filling in the form. You have to keep saving as you go along. So I'll remind myself to cover that quickly. So invitation to tender. When you come in to the PCS tender system, for anyone who's not done this yet, you'll arrive in this area here, which is ITTs open to all suppliers. So we'll need to look through this and try and find, because you can see there's all sorts of things here that are not necessarily relevant and the one that you're looking for. And the way to do that is to go through this filter, choose the project code, click on contains, and in the PCS notice, they'll have given you the project code, which in this case, and you can make a note of it, it's on the slides as well, by the way, so you don't have to go back to PCS, is 20235. Search buttons over here. Okay, and it's now brought up, you can see a whole list of the different lots. So as Lauren described, there are quite a number of lots, all regionally focused. What's also on this list, if you haven't done it already, is what we call a master document. And that's the one that you need to look for first. Now, I've actually downloaded it already, but if you look out, you'll just follow this, you'll see they're all 20235. Once you've checked through these, because that will give you an idea of the areas that you might want to log into, you don't select them all at this stage. All you need to do is choose one of them, and it'll bring you through to the area where you can actually look at the others and get the master as well. So on PCS tender, you have to express an interest first, and it will keep popping up with these boxes asking you to confirm. So at the moment we've come into lot 14, and what we want to do is to find not just lot 14 but also the master, and for that you need to click on this tab here, the multi-lots. So if you just scroll down a little bit, and this, it brings up at the top what we call the master, and then down further down it brings up not just lot 14 but all the other ones. And at this point you can see I've clicked 14, but I've already clicked 11. If I wanted to do 12, for example, I would just click on this here and any of the others. If you click on them and open them up, it's fine. You don't need to, you can do that and just not submit it. So don't worry if you've opened one up by mistake. So, but for the time being, before I go into any of the lots at all, I'm just going to show you where the, sorry, I'm going to go to the master first, because that's where we're going to find the main buyer attachment documents. Okay, so you have to scroll down a bit. This system was built quite a number of decades ago, so it's not necessarily easy if you've not been using it before. Quite a lot of text around. So, sorry, let's get rid of my bit here. At the top, we've got the master. We've got a reminder of the closing date and the time, so please be aware, don't wait till even the 31st to get everything in. It's not submitted yet. It's got a warning about the attachments, just to make sure that we read them. So in this ITT details here, this is where the attachments come in. So I'm just going to click on that just now, show you quickly. They're organised in sort of little folders, if you like, but most of these you can see is just one document, apart from this one here with the maps. There's a cover letter, specification, obviously crucial. The Spd standard statements will help you for things like quality and health and safety, and the environmental ones if you don't have the ISO. The evaluation and award, critical, you must absolutely read that. And then there's various background documents, terms and conditions. Supplier response is just a guide on how to use PCS tender, so you can obviously still look at that. And if you open one up, so say the specification, you can see there's a document there. Click on that and that would download. To get back, you have to click on this path again to get back to the top level. And at the top level, there's an option here to do a mass download. And to be honest, I think that's probably the easiest way. And then you've got all the documents and you can work your way through them one by one. So if you've gone through the buyer attachments and already you've maybe made a note of some questions and things, you can't contact FLS direct. You will have to go through the messaging system. So the messaging system here, so this is us in the master area of messages. If I look at received, there's a few come through which have been opened by me, so I've looked at them. I don't need to reply to these particularly. And if I wanted to create a message, it's a very simple system. You choose one of the classification areas, other if you're not sure, put in a quick subject, type your message, and then send, and that will go through. And when you go back to the sent messages, you will also be able to see if the buyers responded to them. So there's nothing in here at the moment, but if it was, you'd be able to track if they're being picked up. Okay, you can draft a message and keep it, but I think primarily the received messages is where you'll be going to. Also be aware, if anybody asks a message here, probably best not to identify yourself, so keep it neutral. And for any message that's posted and responded to, you'll get something through in your email, and it'll come from autoalert@bravosolutions.co.uk. So anything from that email, you need to click and open up straight away and make sure that you read it as soon as it comes in. Okay, so under ITT, we've got the buyer attachments we've covered, messages we've covered. So we're ready now to look at the response. Now you can go under my response, but because this one's got multiples, it's probably easier to go through this one here. Okay, so we're going to start off with the master document. And when you open this up, you'll see that it's got two different sections. And whatever you put in here is going to apply to all the lots that you bid for. So you're going to fill this in just once. The qualification response is what I would say sort of backward looking. So what have you got in place at the moment? And the technical response is the scored part. Qualification is pass-fail. Technical is some pass-fail, but also scored. And that evaluation and award document and attachment will tell you exactly how all of this fits together in the scoring. So very quickly on qualification. Now here's the save changes that I mentioned. So this will stay at the top of the page as you're working through, and just take care every time you're sort of filling things in, just as often as you remember, go to save changes. It'll click and it'll keep you where you are, whereas save and exit will take you out of this qualification section. But you can go in and out as often as you want. Obviously, you're not going to fill everything in one go. So what you find in PCST, again, I think most of you might be aware of this already, but quite a lot of the text is just instructions. But what you're looking for is response boxes like this, and also these red asterisk marks, because if you don't answer one of those, the system won't let you upload the document. Okay, so things like this, yes, I've read it, what's the date, I've read it, whatever, yesterday, and start to work your way through. Now, the structure of this qualification bit, the first part is all background information. You can see mine fills in automatically because I've used the system before. So there should be nothing there to worry about. It asks whether you're micro, small or medium. It gives you the details of what that means. This part could be important, and this may lead to some questions actually at the end of this session. So the form of participation. So are you part of a group? Generally, you're probably not a consortium as such, but it could be that you're sort of more of a kind of legal grouping brought together. So you can say yes there, and at some point you may be asked for more details. I think this may be, yeah, so this is where the lots are, so you can choose. Let's just tick a few off here, click on next results, just pretend that I'm going for loads of stuff. So that's just a tick the box one. Representative of the bidder generally is the main director. And this is the important part. So do you intend to subcontract? So if you say yes, first you have to list the subcontractors here. So that's some text that I've got just from a previous tender. And then this is important, and I think this is where the question came in about this Spd attachment for the subcontractors. So normally anything with a paperclip, that means there's a document hidden behind there, a template. You click on that, save the file, fill them in, and then attach them here. On any of the attach file instructions, you can only attach one single file. So in this case, if you've got 3 or 4 SPDs from subcontractors, you're going to have to put them into what we call a zip file. And again, the instructions on the slides that you'll get take you through that step by step if you need help with that. So this section 2, part 2 is important. You then go on to part 3, which is what we would generally call the yes/no questions, and it's all about business probity, legality. So in most cases, the answer will be no. Some of these, if you say yes, you'd be immediately barred. If the buyer thinks you clicked on yes by mistake, they'll probably come back and maybe just check that with you. For example, to this one here for terrorist financing, if you got the answer wrong. Okay, so don't be daunted by this bit. I've just spotted there's a couple of questions in the middle that need a yes about paying taxes and social security. But you can see it's a long section, but actually in reality, it won't take you long to fill it in as you go through, and then you'll get to part B. And this is us still in this qualification, the pass-fail document. Again, in the evaluation criteria document, you'll get some background, but most of the information is here about the insurance that's required, for example. So you either already have it or you commit to obtain it. So these are just like a drop-down list. Quite a lot of the questions further down have this, if relevant document is available, please state. In most cases, I would just say not applicable. In the guidance from FLS, it says that they'll come back to you and ask for examples of, say, insurance, for example, at a later stage. Okay, this is an important part. So this is where you show you've got examples of similar projects or contracts that you've undertaken. A minimum number is 2. So I'm guessing from that you might be able to put more, but I suppose 2 will be marked. That might be a question that I would ask maybe back to FLS. If you put in more than 2, is that okay? And then obviously there's goes back 3 years, and here's things here: social benefits, some of the community benefits, so not just what you did technically in the project, but what were some of the wider aspects as well. Relevant examples of supplies and services. So this is basically where you get the template, and that's where you attach it once you've filled it in with your project examples. There's a question about, and this text here, this hasn't come from FLS, this is standard text in the Scottish procurement document, single procurement document. It's actually European text originally, which is why some of it's a little bit difficult. But basically, and in this case, you're not attaching a document, you're just filling in the text. And then I'm going to save my changes here, remember to do that. Let's move down a bit. Okay, so again, there'll be guidance in the document as to what's been looked for here. So that's all about kind of technical staff. Technical bodies might be people, maybe trade associations, maybe people involved in, I don't know, sort of quality control, or maybe something to do with, you know, people who issue some of your training certificates, for example, and give you certifications, that kind of thing. 4C4 is all about supply chain. And again, here, so particularly that might be people supplying your equipment and materials. So be sure to read the documentation and the guidance to see exactly what's needed in this box. The characters is 2000, and what happens is as you type it in, the characters reduce, so it's quite easy to see when you're running out of space. Okay, there's a question on qualifications. Now this is an important one, 4C6, so it's got very detailed requirements. Again, I'm assuming quite familiar to most of you or all of you, but please read that through and make sure that when you fill in the answer that you've addressed all of the guidance there. And again, here it's not an attachment, so you're going to have to find a way here to actually fill that in text. Environmental management, again, there's some elements here which are relating back to UKFS. So that is another document, I think, which is quite important that you need to be reading to make sure that you target your measures to what's included in that. Manpower section is just numbers. So for the last 3 years, so what's the total manpower in the business? And then of those, how many managerial staff? So that would normally include, I don't know, like supervisors, perhaps, if they're sort of reasonably high level as part of the management, as well as senior management in terms of numbers. So nearly finished with this one. Relevant tools, plant and equipment. Again, you have to fill in the box. So it will be really just a list, maybe bullet points. You can't do much formatting here, but if you do it in Word and cut it over, paste it over, it'll save a little bit the formatting. And then finally on this one, for part C is the subcontracting. So what's the proportion? So at this point, all you need is just the percentage. The final two questions are to do with quality management. So if you have ISO 9001, that's fine. So that's what we would call a third-party certificate. So somebody from outside comes in to check. Or you have to demonstrate that you have the following. And these are some of the ones that I showed earlier in the slides. So this is very useful. So the way that you answer this in the qualification, sorry, there's quite a long list here. I would normally say no, because I don't have ISO. Explain why and specify what other means of proof. So there's a little bit of text here that would say, here's what we do have. And at that point, if you do have other documents, they'll be asked for at a later stage. There's no way to, in this particular document, you can upload that separately. So maybe make reference to documents available on request. And it's the same, exactly the same for the environmental management system. So again, probably say, no, I don't have it, but here's what we do have in place. And then very quickly, concluding statement, you just type in name, position, so on. And that's the qualification. So that's, I've spent a little bit of time on that, but more just to go over the sort of how the system is used, if you like, because the same applies to the technical. So we're still in the master document. The second part of the master document is the one that covers some of the issues we described earlier, the technical response. And this is largely, whereas qualification is very much pass-fail, the technical is the one where the scoring comes in. So this is where you're going to have to apply those best practice principles that we talked about and make sure that you leave plenty time to fill in. So there's a reference there to that award criteria document already as well. This is worth 40% of your overall score, so still quite important. So again, I'm not going to go through all the questions in detail here. There's some early ones which are yes or no, about real living wage, GPS trackers, resources, again a yes or no, and then there's some non-core services, little drop-down list you can choose. And this is the first really of what I would call the more technical questions, and the format's going to be quite similar for all of them going down. So you'll see what the percentage is of the 40% score. And here's the guidance. So this is the bit you really need, you know, a good response will, and then you need to pay heed to that and make sure you cover every single element in that. Watch out, so 6 pages of A4. So that's front and back. There's a font size specified, and you've got to save it as a PDF format only, not as Word, before you upload it. Okay, so there's resources. Methodology is quite a nice example, so it's a bit of a scenario, and you've got to detail how you would approach working in this scenario. You've got a bit of a limit again of 6 pages, but there's nice guidance. So I would be expecting to at least have headings for each of those sections there and a bit of explanation underneath. Remember, don't be too concise. If you've got 6 pages, try and use all of that if you can. Training and competency, so slightly less, 2 pages. Lone working is obviously quite important for this type of work. So again, follow the instruction. You might not be able to, people might have a lone working policy, for example, in your health and safety system, but don't upload that just as 2 pages. You need to more fully detail your approach. It's not just that you've got the procedure, how are people trained on it, what's the procedures if there's any issues, all of that, and also where you've got no mobile phone coverage. So it's not just a stick in the policy document. Contract management, now these can be quite demanding questions, particularly if you're maybe a smaller organisation. So again, just try and keep it fit for purpose for how you organise. But here's a question about the quality levels. So maybe go back to some of these things that we covered in the early slides. And obviously complying with health and safety, so it's a bit similar, maybe lots of checks, inspections, training, and so on. Reporting requirements, again, I think most of this will be detailed in the document, so you just need to make sure that you reflect how you'll do that and also say how you'll gather information from subcontractors to make sure that they do their bit as well. And then a question on key performance indicators. Again, that's very much the quality side. So that first section is very much, there's a lot of it about the contract management and doing the work, service delivery. The section on sustainability, so overall, worth quite a bit here, as we mentioned earlier. So impact, so what are your measures? Fair work first, again, that will require a statement rather than just to tick the box. And community benefits, there's a bit of guidance there, but again, referring to this document here for much more information. And the final one is the community benefits, then just the submission there. So I've gone through these in quite a lot of detail, maybe more in the introductory slides. So, you know, please make reference to those, but in particular, make reference to the documents that are available from FLS. So I'm going to save and exit here. So already those 2 sections, the overarching one, the master document, is going to take, I think, quite some thinking through. And then the final part you'll need to do is for any of the lots that you've chosen for the regions, let me just pick one off, lot 11. The only part you'll need to fill in these, although it says technical response, there's nothing to fill in there. The only bit you'll be looking at is the commercial response. And this might be where some questions arise, so please make sure that you look at these carefully before the deadline for questions finishes. Okay, the quantities are estimates, so they're only put forward just so that an evaluation can be made to compare prices, but you're looking to fill in your unit price here and it'll come up with a total. It won't fill in the total immediately, by the way, so fill in your unit price, and then if you click, so if I'm just going to put in a number here that probably doesn't make sense, and if I do save changes, then the total price comes up. So make sure you fill in all the boxes as well, please. If you don't, this red star means that it'll highlight it and you won't be able to submit. Okay, and then there's a section, same format for the non-core services as well. Okay, so I'm just going to save and exit and stop sharing, Elizabeth, because I think we want some time for questions still.